if I could sit across from my 30-year-old self for just 1 hour, I wouldn't give him advice about money or marriage or career. I would ask him one question that might have changed everything. My name is Samuel Whitaker, and I turned 90 this spring. I have outlived my parents, my wife, most of my friends, and even one of my children. And after 9 decades of living, there's a single question I wish I had been brave enough to ask myself when I was 30 years old. The question is simple. Who am I trying to impress? At 30, I thought I knew exactly who I was. I was a young attorney with a new promotion, a growing family, and a house that was just big enough to make me feel proud and just small enough to keep me hungry. I worked long hours and wore that exhaustion like a badge of honor. I believed that if I pushed hard enough, if I earned enough, if I achieved enough, I would finally arrive at that place where a man feels solid and secure. But if I'm honest, I was building my life like a performance. I wanted my father to think I had surpassed him. He was a factory worker who measured success by how much pain you could endure without complaint. I wanted my colleagues to admire me. I wanted my neighbors to notice the new car in the driveway. I wanted my wife to feel she had chosen well. I wanted the world to look at me and nod with approval. What I never stopped to ask was whether the life I was chasing actually belonged to me. When you're 30, you don't feel time breathing down your neck. You feel strong. You assume there will always be another weekend, another summer, another chance to repair what you neglected this week. I told myself that the long hours were temporary, that once I made partner, once the mortgage felt smaller, once the children were older, then I would slow down. But life does not move in clean chapters like that. It moves quietly, in accumulation. My daughter once asked me, when she was about 8 years old, if I would come watch her sing at school. I remember the way she stood in the doorway of my study, holding the flyer with both hands. I told her I would try. That word, try, became a habit in my mouth. That evening, a client called. There was a contract issue, urgent, important, impossible to postpone. I stayed at the office. I told myself she wouldn't remember. She remembers. Years later, when she was grown, and we had one of those careful adult conversations about childhood, she didn't accuse me. She didn't cry. She simply said, "You were always working, Dad." Not angrily, just factually. At 30, if someone had asked me who I was trying to impress, I would have laughed. I would have said I was providing for my family. And that was true, in part. But beneath that truth was something less noble. I was afraid of being ordinary, afraid of being overlooked, afraid that if I stopped achieving, I would disappear. It took me decades to understand that the people who truly loved me were never measuring me that way. My wife, Margaret, used to sit at the kitchen table long after the children had gone to bed, waiting for me to come home. Sometimes she would fall asleep with a book open in her lap. I would kiss her forehead, and she would stir and ask how my day was. I would talk about cases and negotiations and office politics. I rarely asked about her loneliness. I thought I was doing all of it for us. But I never asked whether she needed a husband or a hero. When Margaret got sick in her 70s, everything narrowed. The hospital rooms, the quiet machines, the smell of antiseptic, they have a way of stripping your life down to its essentials. One night, As I held her hand, she looked at me with a kind of tired clarity and said, "You know, Sam, I never cared about the titles. I just liked when you were home." There was no bitterness in her voice. That almost made it harder. After she passed, the house felt enormous. Not because it was large, but because it was quiet. I would walk past the study where I had spent so many nights, and I realized the work that once felt urgent had already been replaced by younger men with sharper suits and stronger eyes. The firm sent flowers. They meant well. Within a year, my name was no longer on the letterhead. That is when the question began to echo in me. Who was I trying to impress? At 90, you have the strange privilege of perspective. The awards gather dust. The bank account becomes something you glance at, not something you chase. What remains vivid are the small moments you nearly overlooked. The way your son used to lean against you during thunderstorms. The way your wife hummed while washing dishes. The sound of your own laughter when you allowed yourself to be unguarded. I don't regret working hard. Work can be honorable. Providing can be loving. But I regret never interrogating my motives. I regret confusing applause with respect, busyness with importance, achievement with identity. If I had asked myself that question at 30, I might have chosen differently in small ways. I might have left the office an hour earlier. I might have said no to one more client and yes to one more bedtime story. I might have risked being seen as less ambitious in order to be more present. The tragedy of youth is not that you make mistakes. It's that you assume you have time to correct them later. Time is generous, but it is not infinite. Now, when my grandchildren visit, they do not care that I once argued cases before judges or negotiated contracts worth more money than they can imagine. They care that I sit on the floor and let them win at board games. They care that I listen to their stories as if they are the most important stories in the world. And in those moments, I feel something I chased for decades without naming it. Enough. That is the word I never understood at 30. I was enough before the promotions. Enough before the bigger house. Enough before anyone applauded. If you are 30 or 40 or even 50 as you listen to this, I am not telling you to abandon your ambitions. I am asking you to sit quietly, just once, and examine them. When you push yourself to exhaustion, when you sacrifice a moment with someone you love, when you say yes to something that makes your chest tighten, ask yourself gently, honestly, who you are trying to impress. If the answer is fear or pride or some invisible audience that will never be satisfied, then you may be building a life that looks impressive from the outside, but feels lonely from within. I am 90 years old. I have had a long, full life. I have known love and loss, success and failure. But if I could gift my younger self one thing, it would not be wisdom about investments or career strategy. It would be the courage to live without performing. In the end, the people who matter are not keeping score, and neither should you.